far as I understand, it started Prabhupada coming to Moscow, then Ananda Shanti, then Mandakini came over for a few times in that arrangement. What happened after that stay? What was the next thing that happened, and where did you guys get involved?
I became GBC of Eastern Europe and all that in 1976. And at that time, Mandakini was having enormous difficulties remaining the wife of Anand Shanti, and there wasn't a possibility to get her into the country. They wouldn't accept that. So the first thing I had to arrange was her to legally get divorced because she wanted to marry someone else. Hansaduta had gone to India about 2 times and had gone transiting through the Moscow airport, and usually that meant from Frankfurt you had to overnight in the Aeroflot Hotel, and there was a very vague possibility that you could walk out the front door for a short period of time or eat somewhere. And during those 2 occasions he met with Anand Shanti and they talked. The next thing that I'm aware of that took place was Gopal Krishna Maharaj had gone to Russia, I think it was in 1977 or 78, and he met with Anand Shanti once and had tried to go to some place with him and got nipped because his shoes were foreign or something like that. You'll have to talk with him to get the exact details. After that, I went there with Suchandra at that time, who's now Bhaktibhushan Swami. We took a tour from Switzerland on an airplane. We were wearing wigs, and we really had no plan of who to meet or where to go. Our tour took us to St. Petersburg and to Moscow. It was a 2-city tour. In St. Petersburg, we were visiting the university there and the art center there. We didn't really meet anybody. We actually were just getting used to the place. When we went to Moscow, it was a very interesting experience. We spent 2 days non-stop with about 8 devotees. At this time, Anand Shanti had been speaking in an institute there. This institute, I forgot the name of this institute. It was some, I don't remember the name. I had visited it also. They invited me there. They spent about, I suppose, 3 hours trying to get out of me any information I knew about Shambhala. They were trying to understand the mystic connections between what went on in the Himalayas and psychic capacities, because at that time they were engaged in a lot of experiments with psychics, especially amongst remote viewers, to see what was going on in the CIA and in Washington and the plans of governments around the world by remote viewing. So they were very interested in what I had to offer them. At the end of the conversation, they realized I didn't have anything to offer them, and that was the end of the relationship. I also wasn't very interested in cooperating with them for obvious reasons, even if I knew something I wasn't about to tell them. So I was kind of vague, and I really didn't want to expose the fact that I was associated with any group of any kind. After that, we had spent 2 days, and then there was an initiation that evening. And we started preparing for that initiation at around 1 in the afternoon. And that meant accumulating and gathering all of the materials, which was a number one endeavor of the most enormous degree. Now, I brought bananas with me in the suitcase, which were illegal. You were supposed to declare fruit, and I did not declare the fruit, so I brought bananas with me in the suitcase, about 4 of them or 5 of them. So we were spending hours and hours trying to find materials. So we had to really make adjustments. For example, we used blue soap powder as one of the colors, and we used salt as another of the colors. We managed to find some kind of chili pepper that became red, and we used black pepper. So we had 4 colors like that from the spices we found. And the ground we had to dig up somewhere, which was very suspicious because a bunch of people in the forest digging up some earth somewhere seemed to be very suspicious in those days. Everything seemed suspicious. If you blew your nose, it was suspicious. So then we had to find some sticks to burn, which was very difficult because it was raining and they were all wet, so we had to put them in the oven and cook them a little bit. And cooking was very difficult. Suchandra, he was cooking the whole day. To find materials was very difficult because you had to stand online for at least 5 hours to get anything, and of course you couldn't find anything, so it was a very ragtag kind of organized fire yagya. But we finally started it around 9:30 at night, and we finished it around 11:30 or almost 12. During the day we found out there was an enormous difference between everybody in this group of 8. In fact, it was divided down the middle in 4 and 4. 4 on the side of Anand Shanti and 4 on the side of the person who became Ananta Vijay, who was actually the most intelligent person who had ever been associated with devotees in the Soviet Union. He was a government employee of the programming department. He was a highly advanced computer programmer, and in those days that was a pretty big achievement because there were no programming languages to work in. You had to use punch cards in many respects. There was mainframe programming. It was usually an assembly code. The guy was, of course I think C had been invented. They were working in C at that time. And an operating system had been invented for computers. So he was quite advanced, very, very intelligent. He spoke English like an American. He was incredibly smart in everything he did, and that caused a lot of difficulty because there were these 2 groups. One group was the extremely intellectual and free-spirited kind of group, and the other group was kind of like a personality group. And they were actually divided. And that was the first time I came to understand that in Russia everything is based on conflict. That there always has to be 2 sides, and these 2 sides always have to be conflicting, and any movement that goes forward has to be a product of a fight and a resolution if there is any. In this particular set of group there wasn't any. But for this particular day they kind of calmed down and agreed to cooperate just for this particular ceremony. And it went on. It wasn't anything interesting except for the fact that as soon as the fire started, because the wood wasn't particularly dry, there was a lot of smoke, and we were in an apartment building, and we were in a 1-room flat. Of course, that's all there was. 1 room, a little itsy-bitsy kitchen, and a bathroom. So the smoke started going out in the hallway, which made a whole thing, and the neighbors were banging on the door, which Anand Shanti managed to calm down. And then we put wet towels from, the old days when we knew how to do that stuff, all around everything to cover the smoke from going out. And so then when it came time actually to put the bananas in the fire, because we had cut each banana in half so that there was one for everybody, they picked up the bananas, and I said, okay, now put it in the fire. And they looked at me and they said, put the banana in the fire? And I said, yes, that's what we have to do now. They said, but it's a banana. I said, yes, we have to put it in the fire now. They said, we haven't seen a banana in 10 years. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is like a rare treat for these people. So I said, okay, skip the banana. Everybody ate their banana. They were very happy. After everything was over, it was quite a very nice feeling. And then we went back to the hotel. We managed to finally get back to the hotel around, I think it was 2:30 in the morning, because it was quite far away. And at that time, there was no transportation. We basically had to walk. We had missed all of the announcements about when the tour was leaving the next day. So it was 7 o'clock in the morning, and I just woke up with this weird feeling. So I walked down to the main lobby, and there was a sign saying that this tour group was leaving at 7:15 for the bus, and it was 7:10. So I ran upstairs and we just simply insanely threw everything in our bags and just ran out the door, and we got in the bus by 7:20 with everybody screaming at us in German terms like Schweinerei and other kinds of not very derogatory terms, looking at us like everything. We just fell asleep in the back of the bus and we were sleeping the whole way back to Switzerland. That was a pretty uneventful trip. The next time was a car trip that I took with Guru Garanga approximately 8 months later. This first trip was in the winter, the second trip was in the late summer, so it was kind of reasonable out. How much detail do you want?
As much as you want to give. But I'd like to stop for 1 second. So you were saying? Well,
after this occasion of having this, actually we had been communicating, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to arrange this meeting. So to be quite frank, I don't remember exactly how we were communicating. I think what I had done was done a transit to India, again through Aeroflot, and I think I passed a note to Anand Shanti, or I had somebody pass a note to him. I don't remember exactly how I arranged that, but I knew I arranged it. Perhaps I also arranged it from St. Petersburg with a phone call again. But I knew that I had some kind of connection, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to arrange all this. But I forgot exactly how I did it, I'm sorry. But after that, we were doing communications also, and for the life of me, I can't remember how we arranged anything, but we...
Let me just go back and ask you a couple questions.
I remember how we did it. Okay. Starting in the spring of 1976, I had been going to Eastern Europe. I had been going a lot to Poland, Hungary, and Yugoslavia, personally in 1976. So up to the point of going to Russia, I had developed a contact in Hungary who was passing messages in Russian through some channel that I wasn't aware of to Moscow, to Anand Shanti. I think it was through some embassy of a third country. So I had actually been doing communications through Hungary. That did not last so long, but I do remember I was doing that for some time. So that's how communications started off. You wanted to ask?
Yeah. When you went there with, originally from, I guess, Switzerland, you went?
Yeah, on the airplane.
How did you, first of all, the two of you, what was were you frightened? Did you have any fear or any, you're trying to get in contact with devotees? Did you know you were going to meet devotees there?
Well, up until that time, both Suchandra and I had been doing a lot of traveling and meeting people together. So we had been in very dangerous situations in East Germany, in Czechoslovakia, in Poland, in Hungary, and in the former Yugoslavia. We had been in situations which really tested us in many ways. So we were not very afraid, because we knew if you followed certain rules, you could more or less blend in with people and you wouldn't be under suspicion. We realized very early on that the main defense was to simply never come under suspicion, to never get to the point of being suspected of something. If you could just manage to blend in as a tourist, or manage to blend in as a person who had something to do which everybody accepted as normal, you really didn't have anything to worry about. The only time you had something to worry about is when you did something out of the ordinary or out of the normal. For example, when we first went to Poland, we went to Lublin also. And in the middle of the program, everybody got so inspired, they jumped up and ran out in the street and started having a kirtan with flutes and instruments and banging things, jumping up and down in the middle of the street in Lublin, which was pretty insane. So at that point we became visible, so we just immediately departed from that place. There are other stories in other countries also, and also our mutual disaster will be instigated, or shall we say, the catalyst will be all of a sudden something extremely out of the ordinary happening, which immediately alerted the KGB, and that was our end. So at this time, up to the point where we were going on the airplane, and also when we were in the car, nothing really out of the ordinary was happening. We were going as official tourists. We had paid the extraordinary amount of money they wanted to declare that you were a tourist, to paying enormous amounts of money for the dumpiest hotels on earth and fees for everything you can imagine. So we just bit the bullet, paid the money, and we went there. We really didn't have fear, not at that time. The fear came later. When we got caught, then we were shaking in our boots.
I think my answer to that question a little bit is, we were how old?
We were stupid.
No, besides stupid, we were young. We were invincible. We were convinced. We had a mission. We had things to do, and we were young, just as I experience with my kids now. When you're 22, 23, 24, 25 years old, nothing stops you. And here it was, the height of communism. I mean, during the Brezhnev era. And
I was 28, so I should have known better.
So 28 still. But I think that was a very major factor, is that youthfulness, and we were fearless.
Right. Yep.
Okay, so you got messages to Ananda Shanti, who
no, well, after that...
But before you say something, he made 8 devotees there, and he's the one that collected this group?
Well, that's very hard. To say made, that's a very bad word. I would have a very hard time explaining how it happened, because I'm not so clear, and neither are they. It seemed that he was speaking very vaguely and generally, because he really didn't know anything. His understanding of what Krishna consciousness was limited simply to India, mystical, something interesting, more or less. He really did not know very much. His knowledge was very limited. So he had this group who was basically a subset of his meeting in this institute. So they were very interested. He learned more later, but we're talking about up to 1976. He really didn't know anything. I mean, really anything. So his group was a subset of people, like some were chess players, like Virya, the big guy with
Surya.
This guy had the strangest hair you could ever imagine. He was a huge guy. He hardly ever spoke, and his basic thing was he played chess all day. He also understood nothing of what was going on, but he just liked Anand Shanti, and his brother Nanda was similarly attracted, and he also understood nothing. He just liked Anand Shanti. However, there was one girl, her name was Krishna Devi, who, I'm sorry to have to say it, but she was kind of loose. And in Russia at that time, 8 abortions was like the rule for everybody. So she managed to have an affair with one of these people. And so she became introduced to this mystical kind of a thing. You have to understand, at that time, tantric, Kama Sutra kind of thing was an introduction into the Veda. Mainly, you would find these yoga teachers or anybody in institutes, they would study it either through mystical ways of expanding psychic capacities to do things which were beneficial for whoever, governments or anybody, or through sexual means, through the Kama Sutra, through tantric kinds of things which would increase their enjoyment in that way. So this girl was coming in through that angle. Anand Shanti came to her afterwards, because they had come in contact with her through that, and then she wanted to do the same thing with him. He wasn't interested in her. And after that, she became more interested in the religious, spiritual side of it, because he was presenting it in a kind of that kind of a way, Hinduism or Indian or something special. He had met this guru. His main way into the whole thing is he met this guru, and he was very impressed. So she became interested. However, her being who she was, now she's a very nice girl, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not trying to in any way impugn upon her character, just the way everybody was in those days. So she was not very interested in Anand Shanti's way of doing things, so she created her own group. And in her own group, the first person, or one of the first persons she contacted, was this person who later on became Ananta Vijaya. She was more connected with people who were highly placed within the professional circles. Ananta Shanti was specifically speaking with people in this institute. Mainly everything he did was within this institute, and it had a lot of impact.
What institute was that?
I'm sorry, I cannot remember.
Some kind of parapsychology
Yeah,
institute,
something like that.
because so many, as you were saying, so many people were, even if you look amongst the devotees today, so many are healers, and I mean, they know Reiki, I mean, just things that took a long time in America to come about. In the former Soviet Union, I mean, everybody knows Reiki. Everybody knows somebody who's a healer. Everybody knows somebody who's a mystic and a psychic. And these were things that were actually engaged and propagated by the government, as you say, for, getting one up on the United States, and for understanding, for monitoring their own citizens and their own people. So these things were very much encouraged and propagated by the government. And this institute was some kind of parapsychological based institute.
It was not a public thing. It was kind of a secretive thing. I mean, when I went in there, I had to go through all of the channels to get in there. I had to have an official invitation. It was something very special to get to see the director of the institute. It wasn't something that you could do.
Like so many things at that time, so much was off limits only to this particular group of people. I mean, they had stores throughout the Soviet Union in the big cities where they were valuta stores, dollar stores, where only foreigners could buy there. You couldn't, first of all, you weren't allowed to have Western currency, foreign currency if you were a Soviet citizen, and even if you did, you couldn't go into these stores. There was a guard at these stores to prevent Soviet citizens from coming into a store in their capital city, Moscow, in St. Petersburg, to buy things, from a store in their own country, in their own city, because they weren't allowed to have foreign currency or to be in these shops. So much was like that. So much was limited to very small groups of people.
He knows much better the demography of the whole situation. He's really into it. He studied it from top to bottom. He's really good at that. Me, I was just dealing with individuals and stuff. But anyway, there were these two groups. One was from the professional side, one was from that institute side. So when you say made, I can't really answer that question. It was kind of like a vague association that created two groups. And in fact, those two groups did branch off. And then from those two groups became 4 groups, became 6 groups. And, everybody having their own thing and being in charge of their own thing. There was this little guru over here and that little guru over there. And everybody had their own movement and everybody had their own thing. And basically it was all loosely organized under the banner of my whatever, I have no idea, esoteric leadership. Connection and leadership on a level that even I was not totally consciously aware of all the time. It was a very subtle association where everybody agreed to cooperate because they had a connection to some person.
Can I answer in that question you asked about, did Ananta Shanti make these devotees? I think, in fairness to him, I mean, he was the first person. So, yes, you could say he made them. I mean, do we say Vartma? Exactly. Do we say Vartma Pradarshika Guru, the one who gave?
You can say he encouraged them to expand their spiritual life.
He planted the seed, and then they had different means by which, I mean, Indian literature was almost impossible to obtain. However, there were Soviet professors, Kotovsky and others, who were experienced and in Indian philosophy as they knew it and they understood it. And they published books. There was even a book published probably in 1976 or 1977, 76 maybe, that was a book, Hinduism. And in that book was a picture of Kanchan Bala and Madhusudan in New York, chanting ecstatically on Harinam Sankirtan, and that one of those famous original busts of Srila Prabhupada from New York when he first came from India. And that was in there, and there was a couple of pages talking about Krishna consciousness as he knew it to be. So there was that, and of course that was interesting. There were big Indology departments, and there was extensive study in Indology. But from that, the Soviet indologist point of view. But Anantashanti was, because he was the man who got the seed, he was the man who transferred that seed. But then, as you say, I think it's very true that the way people survived in the Soviet Union was to not be in a big group. So this kind of, one becomes a guru, another one becomes a guru, or I'm not going to let him become my guru, so I'm going to be a guru. I mean, to use that term loosely, that's what helped them to survive, because it was illegal to have big gatherings. And as we'll tell a story later on, you'll see how illegal. But, I mean, this is how they managed to survive, by having 6 people here and 8 people there, and in even a small town. You didn't know about these 40 other groups of 6 people, because if you came to know of them, their chances of getting in trouble were increased, because the more people that know what I'm doing, the more chances are I'm going to get in trouble. Because the Soviet system was, it's one thing if you do something, but it's the same thing if you know of somebody doing something and you don't turn them in. So, there's so many stories of little kids reporting on their fathers, and their fathers get sent away to jail forever. And the little kid becomes the hero of all Soviet youth, because his country came before even his father. So that was their means of survival, and it was really, it helped them tremendously, and it helped Krishna consciousness to grow, because somebody found out about it. They didn't want to associate with these people necessarily, so they created their own group. And there was a whole other group of devotees that was created.
And also because the KGB were very aware of Anand Shanti's role in this. I don't know how they became aware initially, but they became very aware of his. Of course, they infiltrated, and they became aware of his role of passing it on to others, especially when he became more and more vocal about it after we started having these larger group meetings. So he became more vocal. They became aware of him, and then they put him in the mental hospital because of this. And then they started shooting him full of drugs. Now, Anand Shanti's mental condition was not very good to start with, and you take somebody who's not very good mental condition, of course anybody in that system would have a lot of obstacles to go through, and then it became worse. So whatever word we use, made or encouraged, or any way you want to say it, seed or whatever, he was recognized by the KGB as the man who was the source of all the evil. And so he was the one who bore the brunt of all the punishment initially. Later on, everybody else did too. But he was the one who initially bore the heaviest burden for what happened. And I felt very badly about that. But if I go to the next story, you'll understand how that happened, because it's directly linked to the next story. And like I said, he's the one who knows demography perfectly. He's got it all together.
Let me say one other thing, that everybody suspected the other one of having connections with the KGB. So as you tell the story about Anantashanti, I could think of one person, I won't say who, but there was one person who numerous people thought that he was a KGB plant, and even plant is not that somebody's a KGB man, but all they have to do is twist your arm a little bit, and they had all power to threaten you on anything, any aspect and all aspects of your life. So that was also something that helped to, foster these different groups being created, because, you think this one he does a little thing, or he or she does something suspicious, so they must be reporting, they must be, and things got back to the group or to an individual that should not have been known by somebody outside this little group. So you start looking around and you try to figure out who's the one who's passing this information on to the KGB. So everybody was always very suspicious of each other.
And this also helped feed Anantashanti's paranoia, which helped propel him even further into the depths of mental problems in the psychological hospital, because he was always suspecting everybody. But what he didn't understand was that the KGB had actually planted somebody who he didn't suspect, and that person was constantly feeding him information, which got him into more and more trouble. The more and more paranoid he got, because the more and more paranoid he got, the more and more he talked about this one maybe and that one maybe for what they had done, and he was revealing everything.
And that paranoia also extended out to you and me,
Oh, I did.
and anybody kind of else.
You can't imagine how it extended out. I was the president of the parent. I don't know how I became the president. He was the vice president.
By quality.
Maybe he should have been. Maybe it should have been the other way
No,
around.
he was the president, I was the secretary
Oh,
of
well,
a
who's the
paranoia
vice
club.
president? Yeah, we skipped the vice president. Definitely, we were paranoid. It was when this started, we became very paranoid. But let me tell the story of how it got to that point. So after this meeting of 8, then things started to move out, and then it started to amplify because Ananta Vijay was a very influential person. He was not like Ananta Shanti. Ananta Shanti himself is not an educated person. He had no education really to speak of. He was not even a very good speaker, but what he was very charismatic.
Yeah.
He had an enormous amount of charisma as far as Russians would go. He was very charismatic. You'll even find devotees today, or used to be devotees today, who will say, Anand Shanti was our father. We see him like a father. He gave us everything. So in his particular group, which was small out of necessity, he was very charismatic. Now on the other side, and that kind of person was associated with him, people who enjoyed being with charismatic personalities. On the other side, you had this very intellectual and very capable person, Ananta Vijay, with his group, which was expanding into the extreme professionals, the extremely highly educated, the extremely qualified personalities, and even in the politicians. I'm not exactly sure. At this point, somebody had contacted Pasha, who was Brezhnev's healer, which is a very important point in this conversation, because when we get to what happened when we got kicked out of the country, how my rear end was saved was through this lady. But anyway, that's another...
Not Jana.
Pasha.
Pasha?
Yeah. She was the healer of Brezhnev. She was like the mystic behind Brezhnev. So, but Ananta Vijay, he managed to create his group, and Anand Shanti managed to create his group, and then from them they all went out. So the next time I came in was with Guru Garanga. We drove through St. Petersburg to Moscow to Kiev and to Minsk, and then out with intermediary stops because they didn't let you drive so far. And
Under what auspices were you driving? In other words,
it was a camping tour. We had to stay in camping places because it was much cheaper. I was really low on funds. We had to stay in camping places, and you honestly cannot imagine the conditions we had to stay in. They are indescribable. But that's not really so important in this story. But it was really indescribable, the conditions we had to stay in, and the fact that we had no food. Really, all we had to eat was the nougat and marzipan that I had hidden under the front seat that I was trying to ration out so that we would survive, until Guru Garanga found it one day and went berserk and ate all the nougat and went insane. But anyway, that's another thing. So we had been driving, but this time at every location there were people. It was totally different. By this time, it had very much expanded, and in St. Petersburg, we were in an apartment of some professors. Now, I don't remember what they were professors of, but the husband and wife were professors, and we had a very nice program there with the group that was in St. Petersburg. Maybe by this time there was like 10 or 11 people. Then when we were in Moscow, I started to get a little worried because there were about 70 people in this group, and it was in a very big room. It was in somebody's house, and there were a lot of people there. And it was arranged by that girl who was a little... What was her name? I have no idea. Very nice girl. Maybe it was Ananga Manjari. Very nice girl, very sweet.
She became Bhardraja's wife?
I'm sorry, I don't really... but anyway, it was very nice, but there were a lot of people there, and there was about 38 of them got initiated at that time. So, all of a sudden I realized that, well, the first was 8 and now it's 38. The first group was the only people there. The second group was 38 and there were 75 in the room. And I said, this is serious. Something's happening here that I think is way beyond my expectation and capacity to control. And these people were very gung-ho. They were mainly concerned with how to spread everything, how to spread it more and more. Unfortunately, before I arrived in Moscow, Ananta Vijay committed suicide. He wanted to leave the country. He wanted to go to the West because he couldn't tolerate anything anymore. He was too intelligent. And he thought by speaking perfect English and having all these qualifications, he would be hired to do some kind of government job. He was not hired. He was passed by, so he just committed suicide, which is a very great loss. It really devastated a lot of people, and it especially devastated me because he was the one I was communicating with all the time. I had clear access to him. I could even talk to him on the telephone regularly. It wasn't a problem because of the contacts he had at his company or wherever he worked. I was able to have really clear communications with him, and since he spoke perfect English, there wasn't a problem. After he died, and Premavati and Vishwamitra, they were speaking English afterwards, and we had communications with them. But after this meeting, they were so fired up and so gung-ho. I was telling them, I said, listen, you are in the Soviet Union. You should be very, very careful what you do. Never speak openly about what you're doing. Do it like we have done it before, which means you just go from person to person, or you speak very vaguely like I've been speaking. You speak very subtly about, you never really mention God directly. We were always giving lectures which were very convoluted whenever we were speaking in public or wherever there were persons in the room that we didn't trust. We would speak around the point and take a half an hour to get to the point and always stop just before the conclusion so that everybody's mind would roll on by the inertia, by the continuation of the force to God or to further understandings of spirituality. We would let them draw their own conclusions. We'd just go to the point and stop, and then they would just roll on into the conclusion. We would save ourselves that way. But unfortunately, those who became very enthusiastic, they did not have such discretion because, as we will explain when we got caught, they thought they lived in a free country. They thought they were protected by their constitution. They thought they had religious freedom. But they also knew that the KGB was against groups, so they were afraid of groups only, not what they said, which was a huge mistake. After we left Moscow and we went to Kiev, and also Minsk, a group followed us. So there were also one person in each city who contacted us. So we had about 12 or 15 people who were following us to wherever we went, not in the same car and not at the same time. So when we were in Kiev, for instance, we all had a predetermined time. We met at the main square in Kiev. And, or was it in Minsk? I don't remember. I remember physically what it looks like. It was a very big square, and there were huge buildings all around it, and there was a park there. So we met there, and then we could only stay together for about 5 minutes. And then we all walked, everybody, in a different direction, and we all walked to another place where we had a predetermined meeting point. And then we would meet there for about 5 or 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then we would split again. Unfortunately, at this time, somebody said someone was following them. So at that point when we met again, it was a 1-minute meeting. We all just left. And we drove to the next city, and then we left. After that, everything started expanding very much. And it was at this time that I think met with you in L.A., and I arranged with Rameshwar. Rameshwar was great.
Okay, let me just stop one thing. I have a question. When you took off on this trip with Guru Garanga, camping trip,
yeah.
I mean, as far as being an American at that, I never heard that you could go to Russia on a camping trip. I mean, that, it's always very difficult to get into the country as far as I knew. So...
No, you could go on a camping trip, sure.
You could. So it was not I knew you weren't followed by agents. I didn't have to have a handler with you the whole time.
Oh, no.
So that's somewhat of a myth then, that at that time in the Soviet Union that you always had to have an in-tourist person?
No, it depends on how you entered the country. If you go in strictly as a tourist, and you had on your visa, like when we went on the tour with the airplane, we had a tour guide, but we were never on the tour. That got them upset. But they didn't do anything about it. The next time I came in, we specifically went on a camping trip because one of the unique features of the camping trip was that they said exactly where you had to be. It's kind of funny. It was like this. We entered through Finland. It was the only way you could enter. And then we had something like 2 hours to register to come to St. Petersburg. We had to register in a particular camping place, which was on the northern side of St. Petersburg. We then could stay exactly 1 day or 2 days or whatever it was. Then we had to drive exactly 750 miles or kilometers to the next camping place. We had to go specifically to another camping place, which was in between Moscow or something and St. Petersburg. And we had to register there at exactly that time. That was at this camping place to get there was only one bathroom for, I think, the 500 people in the camping place, and you had to stand online for at least, 2 hours to take a shower. That was a very interesting camping place. We used to sleep in the car because we couldn't stay anywhere else. I had a Citroen station wagon, so the two of us were sleeping in the station wagon, but it had like this in the back, so we're sleeping on these lumps. Just one of the many stories. So then they would make you you're forced to leave to go to the next place at exactly this time, to check in exactly at that time. That was all they did. You were allowed to roam in the particular city you had the visa for, when it was not a transit stop, for the amount of days you had a visa. So it was fairly reasonable.
Just so you know, I was in St. Petersburg in 1968, and I was roamed freely without any problem.
There you go.
So I do know that that's...
Yeah.
But this is something that it's interesting because the American government had their spin that they presented to the American public, and the Soviet government had their spin. And it's kind of like that, who is crazy? You know, they say about us the same thing that we say about them. So, I mean, in America, what you asked is exactly right. We thought, you couldn't go anywhere without a handler, without an in-tourist person, without a guide. They did definitely, as you said, strictly, everything has to be prearranged, where you're staying, how long you're going to be there, how long it takes, a normal person to get from one place to the next. You have to check in, you have to check out, but then you do have that freedom. And like when I went to Moscow so many times, it's like I did whatever I wanted to do. I checked in when I wanted, and even with some of these tours, it was always good to appear for the morning tour, and then you take the rest of the day off and you go do and you wander and you meet with people, whatever. But it was interesting because they say so many things about us, and we say so many things about them. But there's a whole lot of gray area in between there where there is freedom and some lacks. Because in meeting Soviet visitors in America, which I was doing, that they had the exact same kind. You could not go too close to the Lockheed Grumman factory in Los Angeles, if that's the one it was. You could not go into this part of town because there was Lockheed Grumman is aeronautical, facility. So there were places that if you wanted to go from here to here and there was something in the middle that's sensitive, you had to go. As a Soviet tourist, you had to go around that place. So they did the same thing to us that we did to them. It's just we only heard how bad they were. We didn't hear, what the American government's restrictions were on them.
Okay, Rameshwar, we're back to Rameshwar.
What year was it? The book fair?
79.
In 1979, Kirtiraj called me, I think, and asked me to arrange the book fair, which meant money and facilities and books and a visa and so on. Because at that time he didn't have any facilities. So I called Rameshwar, and later I went there. And he was just really accommodating. He went totally out of his way to pay for and arrange for everything for Kirtiraj. He was...
No, that's not true. He was very accommodating, very encouraging. You paid for everything.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Yeah, you did. He didn't pay for anything. You paid for everything. You paid for ticket, visa, all that kind of stuff you have to do. It was arranged. It was arranged through Bombay because it was the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust in Bombay. But you paid for everything through the BBT in, I presume, through the BBT in Sweden. And but he was very accommodating, very encouraging, very facilitating. But you paid for everything.
I'm pretty sure he paid for something.
Well, maybe he gave you a kickback later.
Yeah,
but no, you paid for everything. You did pay for everything.
Well,
Which amounted to, because it was, as you said, hotels, unbelievable amount of money per night for even a dingy place. I got to stay in a real nice hotel because that was the one that was the one closest to the book fair facility. But
I'm sure he paid for it.
you paid for everything. No,
I think he paid me back through. I think what
that
happened
may
was,
be.
I think, okay, but for
There
sure.
were a lot of shady deals going on at that.
Yeah,
a lot of paybacks.
I paid back all this stuff in Europe because it was all here, and he paid me back through the BBT in LA. I'm sure of it. I know he paid for it because I remember to this day how nice he was to pay for everything. He actually went out of his way to do it. Because as whatever you want to think about Rameshwar, I thought he was so helpful to me personally. He helped me in all kinds of ways for establishing Eastern European book publishing and Russian book fair things. I know the first one anyway. The second one not. The second, whatever we did after that, I paid for sure. But because I had some money then in the beginning, I didn't really have that much money. But he definitely paid for the first one. And then so I just helped whatever I could, and he went there, so he has to tell you.
It was quite an amazing experience because here we were living in Los Angeles. Actually, this was 1979. In 1975, I should say 1974, there was communication that I had with Srila Prabhupada about going to Poland. Because in 1973, when my wife and I were married, we went and spent 4 months in Calcutta. At the Calcutta Temple location on Albert Road, right next door, the Polish government was building a new consulate for Calcutta. So they were building this maybe 4 or 5 story, very nice building, and it was still under construction when we were there. And Bhavananda was the, I think, temple president at that time in Calcutta. And one evening, the consul general's wife, Polish consul general's wife, came to the temple, came to evening arti, chanted, danced, and gave a 10 rupee donation. And that was very exciting to Bhavananda. And Prabhupada was in Calcutta at that time, between Calcutta and Mayapur. So Bhavananda told Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, so you should send someone to go and preach to them. And then they should go to Poland and open a center. That would please me very much. So Bhavananda was really excited by this. So he told myself and my wife and Bardraj and Rukmini, and we contacted the Polish consulate and we made an appointment. So we went and talked to the consul general and his wife. Nice, cordial meeting. And as a result of that, Hari Puja and myself and our daughter Raga, who was 1.5 years old at the time, went from Los Angeles to Poland, which was a whole other story. And we spent 3 months in Poland and made contacts. And
wasn't Poland at that time part of it? Was behind the Iron Curtain.
Absolutely.
So all
absolutely.
the same rules apply that he was describing.
All the same rules apply, and even some more. Because when you were in Russia, it was kind of like when you were in the Soviet Union, the Soviets were watching you, you were in their borders, you were under their control. But when things were going on in these satellites, Poland, Yugoslavia, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, they were more careful about what was going out there because it was like out of sight, out of mind. So if it was a little bit further, they had to be extra diligent to make sure they had things under control. So yes, it was, the same sort of standards, and maybe somewhat a little bit more strictly watched because the Poles were also careful, like in Czechoslovakia and Hungary, that if we don't behave ourselves, the Soviet tanks are going to roll in. So, so after it was very tough. I mean, so tough in Poland, and certainly for a family. But it gave us a real taste, and I think inspired us to continue on. So after we returned to Los Angeles from Poland via Germany, I continued to correspond with Prabhupada, and Prabhupada encouraged me to arrange to get his books translated and published in Polish and Russian. So the Russian connection was there. Plus, when you came to LA, we went to a Soviet merchant marine ship that these ships would very often come into Long Beach Harbor.
Oh, yeah.
So, and that was an interesting experience. And it was always interesting experiences because my wife would make cookies. We would offer them. They would be prasadam. I would take incense, and Dwarkadish had translated the Easy Journey to Other Planets into Russian. A kind of crude translation, but it got the point across and got people interested. And I managed to get a whole bunch of these sent to me in LA. So, Dwarkesh. And so I would go down to these ships 2 or 3 times a week into Long Beach Harbor, and I'd have a book bag, and I'd walk, up the gangplank, and they'd be looking, who's this guy? He's not a pier worker. And I would ask them, I said, such an interesting ship. Can I have a tour of your ship? And they'd say, well, let me check. So they would check with some official. Usually it was the Politruk, who was the KGB representative on that ship. And by the way, when those people, the workers from the ship, all men, when they would go out into town, which they were allowed to do, they would always go in threes. And usually if there were 2 younger guys, the third guy would be an older guy. Because if there's 2 people, it's just, I go, hey, let's do this. You say, okay, let's do this. We won't tell anybody. But your chances of doing that, getting 3 people to agree to the same thing to do, which you're not supposed to be doing, was harder. And especially if the young guys wanted to do something exciting, the old man would put the brakes on it. So these are the ways they controlled their people. So ultimately they would let me come on the ship, and I'd take a tour, and I'd be fascinated by all the, gadgets and the screens and the dials and the buttons. And I would be slipping out these Russian Easy Journey to Other Planets, and I'd put one behind the radar unit in the big control room, and I'd say, can I see your library and see what kind of books you have? So I'd take down one book and I'd look. In the meantime, they were kind of bored, so I took down one book and I'd go like this, and I'd put back 2 books. And so wherever I could, I would leave books, where they wouldn't be easily found, but ultimately they would be found. And sometimes it happened probably 2 or 3 times that even before I got off the ship, somebody found a book and, came and said, you have to leave now. And then yelled at the guy, and I don't know what they did to him afterwards, the guy who gave permission or took me on the tour because they didn't watch me properly. So I had this taste, you could say, for, Russia and Russians and giving Prabhupada's books in Russian. So, excuse me. So I took incense, and I'd talk, and I'd give them incense, little gifts, and cookies, and it was prasadam. I just said my wife baked these, So it was interesting. It took all different kinds of forms depending on the situation. So after coming back from Poland, I corresponded with Prabhupada, and I told him, I had been telling him about these ships. So he mentioned about getting his books translated and published in Polish and Russian. So somehow or other, I came to hear about, I think because I became a member of the USSR Friendship Society, which was exactly the kind of organization that Joe McCarthy went after in his day. Soviet sympathizers, commies, people who, were sympathetic to the Soviet ideals, political ideals. So, here I was, probably 23 years old, 22 years old, and I hook up with these, and it's mostly older people who were in this organization here. They were tickled pink. They had a 23-year-old enthusiastic kid, American kid, wanting to be involved with this organization. So they hooked me up with all these visiting Soviet, diplomats and, mayors of cities and head of the council and the factory leader, and I would give these people prasadam, give them books, and go to functions and drive them around and take them to Disneyland and bring them home for dinner. And these people were the organizers of the organization, leaders of the organization. They had no problem with it because they were also Americans. They thought, it's innocent, and he's, enthusiastic to be with these people. So I came to know through them.
Let me just stop here. So what were these reactions of, these were people, Soviet citizens who were on official tours, friendship tours, right? And you would be talking with them, and at some point you'd bring out a book to give to them as a gift. What was some of the most unique reactions that you had to these people?
The reactions were different based on the people. Some were, like there was a movie star in one case, and she was tickled pink. The guy who was the head of a Volga factory in Minsk was, a little bit less, he's a 52-year-old guy, a little bit less, excited by it. But this was a friendship organization, and they would come with like suitcases packed full of these Soviet souvenirs, Lenin badges, these little booklets of postcards. So they would, muster up this stuff to bring with them to give to the Americans that they met. So it was perfectly acceptable to give and receive gifts back and forth. And home visits were really encouraged for them to be able to see American home life,
You lived right at the temple.
Yeah.
So you brought them to the temple.
Yes. And, a couple of them took them over to the temple to see the deities. But, like during the course of the day or the evening, it wasn't like it was big, bustling. It's like, where is this? It was just an apartment building in Los Angeles. And, they were happy to come over. And they got a wonderful meal. And, they were in somebody's home, so they were fine with it. And I kept up correspondence with a number of them. And I would get these different publications, Soviet Life and different publications. So through it, I found out about the Moscow Book Fair. So I guess my thought was to do it through India, to organize it through the BBT in Bombay. And of course, because it was Harikesha's responsibility, his zone, that, I contacted him and we coordinated and organized. And I was young and excited, but I was also scared because, it was my first, I had been to Poland, but here it is going into the mouth of the lion, I guess, to go to Moscow. And with, suitcases full of Prabhupada's books. So I just...
Russia's the bear. The claws of the bear.
Yeah, the claws of the bear, exactly. So, so then everybody was enthusiastic. And it was paid for and facilitated, and I got the books and everything was arranged, and arrived in Moscow, I think, with 2 phone numbers, one for Anantashanti and one for Premavati. Couldn't reach Anantashanti, which proved to be very often the case. His first 3 numbers of his phone was 169. I don't remember the other numbers. But contacted Premavati and made arrangements in a very kind of clandestine way. I didn't say much to arrange the meeting, and I met her in Moscow, in the center of Moscow, in front of St. Basil's Cathedral, where that famous picture of Prabhupada is from. Because so many tourists and people taking pictures, and it was just, a natural place for foreigners to be. So, and as you said about not arousing suspicion, in those days, the Soviet people only wore clothes that were black, brown, or gray. So I think you told me, don't wear a blue parka, or don't wear anything red. Sometimes people would wear red, but they were only ladies. So if you had a red ski jacket on, it's like, wait a second, this guy's definitely a foreigner. So, you just all these kind of things to not bring suspicion about yourself because everybody wore black, brown, or dark blue or gray. So, so I met her in front of St. Basil's Cathedral, and we said, all right, best place to go is let's take a boat around Moscow, this tour boat. So we went on that tour boat, and there we got to talk freely, watch who's, who could be listening, who's in earshot. And so we set up a program where a group of devotees, and if she had her group, and that group of devotees, we got together and we had a program, and we continued to have programs for the duration of my stay, which I think was 10 days in Moscow, which was a pretty long time. And more people started to get involved, and I had asked...
Let me just ask you a question. So when you had these engagements, what would happen? Would you actually preach direct Krishna consciousness at these engagements, or what was your interaction?
Oh, at that time, and me, it was direct Krishna consciousness. I mean, mostly these were programs with devotees only. They were not open programs. They were in people's homes. And if there were people who weren't devotees, they were real close to becoming devotees. That they had been associating for a long time, or they expressed a lot of interest. So mine were not open programs. Mine were programs with the devotees. So yes, it was just totally open. Totally straightforward. For the Moscow Book Fair, I had expressed to Premavati and a couple of others that were initially there in our first meeting that we should try to distribute prasadam to the people coming to see the booth. So we had a full display, a back wall and a side wall of all Prabhupada's books. We had a table up front. They had a tape recorder, and I brought a kirtan tape that we played the whole time from morning till night at the booth. And what we arranged was that the devotees would go out to the market, to the stores, and they would buy powdered milk, butter, and powdered sugar they could buy. And sometimes one day it was more and one day it was less, but they bought out the stores